Good evening, and thank you for being with us here at TruthWorks Network. I'm Janice Graham, the founder of TruthWorks Network, and your host tonight and moderator. Tonight at our comment, tonight at If America Fails, the Coming Tyranny. I can tell you all about that and why that was said. We're going to be talking about American democracy under siege, the players, and the game. There are numerous disturbing parallels between The Handmaid's Tale and current politics in the US, especially those of the Republican Party, the GOP, the political players inside of it. There is a huge uprise of fascism and authoritarianism in America, fueling and fueled through a national platform manipulated by corrupt politics and criminal underpinnings that have taken hold in this country. I think you will agree. If you are new, let me tell you a little about this series. If America Fails is an 11-week discussion forum exploring the themes and lessons of the dystopian tale, The Handmaid's Tale, which reflects the process of eradicating democracy, making way for autocratic, oppressive forms of government. If America Fails, the Coming Tyranny We explore the themes represented by both the book The Handmaid's Tale, written by Margaret Atwood, and The Handmaid's Tale, the Hulu series, which is an adaptation of the book. We thank you for joining us tonight. Powerful people have taken control, and we are seeing some of the moves toward a more autocratic and democracy in crisis in our country. The GOP has completely discounted the rights of adult females, the working poor, Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, and have moved to discount their places as American citizens, to eradicate, essentially, their agency in this republic. Women now must give birth or die trying. Insurrectionists, long groomed and organized, have attacked the U.S. Capitol building. There are signs. There is vapor in the air, and state legislators riding on the tide of states' rights, which was established following the emancipation of chattel slaves in this country. They want to undo it all, to shake the very roots of an already fragile democracy and lift it out of its very shallow planted places. Powerful people have taken control. Those who look to make America white again have wrapped themselves in an Americanized white supremacy ideology and force us into public policy disguised in their translation of Christianity and the Bible as a book that commands or condones the worst crimes known to mankind, which we see and we're told as a looking glass in The Handmaid's Tale. Michelle Odom, who was the senior producer at TruthWorks Network, who put this series together, and I discussed for many years the opportunity to provide The Handmaid's Tale as a looking glass for America. American direction is now controlled by the power of greed and religious fanatics who behave much like primitive witch doctors who blame women and the undesirables and treat them as chattels. Who are these players and what are the role of their game? What are the rules of their game? That is what we're asking ourselves tonight. We see them in the world of the Republic of Gilead, but do we see them in the Republic of the United States of America? We look at all the reality of the parallels of people and policy as told in this tale tonight with Dr. Cynthia Ann Baron in this episode. Let me tell you a little about our guest tonight. Dr. Cynthia Ann Baron is an associate professor in theater and film at Bowling Green State University, where she researches and teaches, authors scholarly books and articles on subjects related to the discipline, and provides keynote speeches and other kinds of presentations at conferences both domestically and internationally. She has taught courses on intersections between the film media industry, national security, and cultural moments, and Hollywood censorship and American culture and performance and theater in the Americas. She is co-chair of the Caucus on Class of the Society for Cinema and Media. Dr. Baron works with both graduate and undergraduate students and is active in enriching student life in roles such as faculty advisor for Tuesdays at the Guiche, a fall and spring film series featuring cult and independent films and programming. She has written, co authored, or co edited 6 books since 2004: Acting Indie, Industry, Aesthetics, and Performance, Modern Acting, the Lost Chapter of American Film and Theater, More Than a Method, Trends and Traditions in Contemporary Film Performance. And current book projects include recasting white genres, race, ethnicity, and performance. And we are so pleased to be able to have with us tonight at If America Fails, Dr. Cynthia Ann Baron, who is joining us once again. Thank you so much, and it's good to see you back.
Thanks for having me, and thanks so much for doing this series and for all your work. We're all better for it. I don't know how you must not sleep. I guess that's just kind of uh,
Well, I have to, even though El Michelle is no longer with the production, I do have to say that she set the foundation for this. She was actually listening and making notes for months with the discussion about why we should do this. So I'm always giving her all of the credit that is deserved. As a matter of fact, she was the one we decided we've got to go find people who really know this tale and understand its relevance and its nuances. And she came back and she said, "Oh, I found this lady, Dr. Cynthia Ann Baron, and she's done this and she's done that, and she's in theater and she knows the media and how this comes about." So, I mean, you have such a multi-dimensional background to talk about this tale. You really do, Dr. Barron, and that is from the perspective of it being theater, it being media, it being politics, and your work in your new book that you're working on race and ethnicity and how that fits into all of this. Um, we had Dr. Ray Wimbush last week, um, and he has and talking about white supremacy, and and one of the things that he concluded and I agreed about is that this is how the persistence of a white supremacist society ends. The story tells us, and we can see it. We can see it all in places like Tigray and Ethiopia and Somalia. We can even see it in places like Ukraine and Russia and in the works of a dictator by the name of Vladimir Putin. The new the that this is no different. And that's what I think people don't get. And one of the things I do want to talk to you about is what's happening in Ukraine, and we are certainly very concerned and um, horrified at what is happening to the people of the Ukraine, and also the tragedies of a country where propaganda has been so well embedded and successful that Russian citizens are not figuring out why they're losing McDonald's.
and they're not the only country where different types of propaganda is just part of everyday life. That's the super scary part. If it were just confined to one part of the globe, that would
Yeah.
be one thing. That'd be bad enough. But the fact that, Atwood identified that the U.S. is ripe, you know, part of its history is its buying in to propaganda,
Hmm.
uh, is terrifying, and
Yeah.
it's just has to be talked about.
Well, I think that part of it, and let's talk about this for a moment, Dr. Barron, that we don't recognize. It's like the the Handmaid's Tale, which is why El Michelle Odom and I were so persistent about doing this broadcast, that people do not see what is in front of them. And it's not the trees and it's not the forest kind of um, perception. It is that they simply don't see that there is a propaganda machine that created the right wing fanatics that organize insurrection, that organize truck convoys, that organize um, anti vax campaigns, anti mask campaigns, that organize to the extent that a governor can insist on having a bill where gay and L- LGBTQ persons are just demonized and and children traumatized. That they don't see it as the same kind of propaganda that goes on in Russia.
Right, and also that I mean, you've listed some of the horrifying facts of our daily life, and it goes back to propaganda that begins, from the moment you have the colonial settlers arriving, and they arrive as elites and as genocidal maniacs. Can I say?
Yeah.
And that the idea that we are not even really a democracy, but that we are a republic, that there are certain representatives, that there are certain people, old white guys, who should be the representatives of everyone in the country and make the decisions for everybody.
Hmm.
That the fact that that's been normalized for centuries in this country is is evidence that the history of propaganda goes back at least
Hmm.
at
Hmm.
least to 1607. Let's
Hmm.
just start there.
Hmm. But people who, I mean, I find it very interesting, and one of the reasons that it has worked so well is that many American citizens who take for granted this democracy and are unable to understand the crisis under which it is now pressed have not paid attention to what's going on in their government, what's going on around them, that they have not enriched their own cultural experiences to understand what is happening around them as long as they are okay.
Yes, exactly.
One day
Exactly.
they're okay, and the next day, maybe not.
Right, right, right. And for those who are losing ground, for those whites who are losing ground, it is, of course, not the elite's fault. It's not the fault of elites deciding to, arrange a transnational system of production that cuts them out, but they instead become additionally susceptible to white supremacist rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
And that's anyway, we can keep talking about that, but that is a yeah,
Well,
you're
I think it's
completely right.
important to talk about. Let's reach a little bit more on this.
Well,
In the
yeah.
let's take the Ahmaud Arbery case, which is a very contemporary case, where uh, white gentlemen felt that they had to protect a neighborhood, and one of them didn't even live in the neighborhood because they had bought into the idea of all of the propaganda around them. And some people would say because they had not exposed themselves, read some books on Black Power or Black Lives Matter, but it's so embedded that they felt privileged. Now that's on one dimension of those particular events. But then you had the police department, which is a representative of the people that they are supposed to serve, who had no defense to operate in their jobs in a different way because it is so embedded. So I've been asking all of the guests in this series, how do you even begin to break that mode? Or, as in Rwanda, at the time of the genocide, there were hundreds of thousands of people dead, and people began to understand what the hatred between the uh, different tribes of that country meant.
um I, I actually am, I'm so excited that you brought that up because it's something I wanted to actually talk about, and I was a little nervous about talking about it because
You
I
can't be
spent
nervous on here, Dr. Barron. You've been here before. We
no,
don't.
but I'll tell you why, because I spend all my time following the money and digging up dirt,
Mm-hmm.
and you ask about who the players are and what's the game, and the players are it is elites who are the players, and the trick is that there's not enough to go around, and the way to break that is to finally get everybody to recognize, or a larger percentage of people to recognize, that there is enough to go around. And that even in a crisis, even in a downturn, we can't let elites use it as an opportunity to gain more power and control, but instead we need to band together. So I was so fortunate that as somebody like just out of college, I was working on a documentary. And one of the people that we interviewed was a woman who was a Holocaust survivor. And she was working as, I don't know, an accountant for the city of Berkeley or something, right? She's just a lady in the office, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
and and we were talking about questions of it's these actual, these sort of questions, and what is success, and so forth. And she sat back and she said, people need to understand that there's no limit to success, that it's not some sort of finite thing, that if one person's successful, another person's going to be unsuccessful. She said instead, what people need to understand is that we all sink or swim together, that there's no downside to sharing, to recognizing that everybody, that it just is illogical to imagine that there isn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, the logical perception, if you actually think about it, there's enough to go around. There is always going to be enough to go around. And you just have to keep people from that hysteria that they have to keep grabbing more for themselves and pushing other people away from their stuff, because those people who are so afraid are of not having enough, that's their fear. That's not reality.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I think that is so interesting about the Handmaid's Tale, and I think it's marvelous that Atwood makes Fred Waterford a marketing expert.
Yes.
Because what marketing is designed to do is to make you feel like shit. That you don't
have enough. You're
you don't have
insufficient.
enough. You're
No.
never going to have enough. You got to buy this. You got to get this. You got to buy that. You've got bad breath and body odor and zits and fat, and your car's not good enough, and your wife's not good enough, and your life's not good enough.
Let's go back to Fred. Because one of the things that he did after he figured out that Serena Joy's book was going to be successful is that he usurped it and he sold it. And he realized in the process of that, he could get very, very wealthy. He could have through her work, he could be powerful.
Oh, yeah.
The player and the game.
Yep.
And the mistake that she made, which has been made, a point that has been made on this forum many times now, is she bought into the suppression and oppression of women because she thought that the men would let her in and be a powerful woman, and she did not understand that she was going to get nothing.
Which is just like all the rest of us suckers who think that if we support people who are let's say politically or socially, if we support people who are ruthless and are living in some hyper capitalist white supremacist vision, if we think that any of them are going to let anybody else in,
and have some,
some, or like, how stupid are we? But that is exactly what is happening now. And you know what? It has happened from the very first of this country, and it is you would think that you'd think that people with shared class interests would figure out, oh yeah, we're in the same boat, we should band together. But no, whites are just, it's the Serena move. Oh, I'm gonna get my piece by aligning myself with the white elites, and it's not going to happen.
Yeah, with the
It's
white and male elite.
Yeah,
And
it's
I'm gonna
stupid.
write myself in to the game until I'm not in the game and I have no
Well,
child and no finger. but
and
you're onto something. You're onto something there. What puzzles most people who do not understand how the game of class politics and class identity works. They pose the question, well, why are all these poor people supporting white poor people, supporting Donald Trump, supporting all of the people? They love Don Jr. and they love his girlfriend and they love Marjorie Taylor and Crawhorn and all of those people who are just, even to say their name makes me cringe. Uh, why would they do that? And part of that is that um, we we understand that in this country, white supremacy is so embedded that whiteness trumps, quote unquote, trumps any other thing, and that neoliberalism has seeped so much as a marketing ploy. It's a marketing ploy. The whole privatization, that people have bought into the idea that if I go along with a very wealthy man who has a golden escalator and he comes down it and I go along with him, I might win something too.
it's also that the idea of cutting taxes. So the recent um, CPAC convention, um, the two major pieces on their coming out of that meeting of conservatives, two things: the more tax cuts, and and
Imagine that.
control of curriculum.
Yeah.
So increased tax cuts does two nifty things. Um, the first thing is that it keeps those who are ahead. Um, it's, it keeps them farther ahead, right?
Mhm,
And it
mhm,
makes the rich richer, and so that's somehow a good thing, because you want the people on your team, you want them to be even farther ahead in the race, I guess.
mhm,
But the other thing is that's code for stopping funding for social problems and
mhm.
social programs, right? So, and that's always interpreted as giving money to brown people.
Yeah, yeah. It's
So
it's
that's
the thing is that is so important to learn from this tale, from this story. If you can learn something from Black Panther, and you can learn something from Star Wars, and you can learn something from us and them and whatever, um, that that denial has brings with it consequences. I look at the major player, who was June, who was without a doubt a very smart woman, very worldly, very well read. And I always ask the question, Why didn't she and her family get out earlier? They lost their jobs. She lost her bank account. And they were still mulling around trying to figure out, is this real? Waiting for something or someone to stop it. And it never happened. And they got caught in the crossfire. That's one set of things. The other is that I just have to keep going back to both the religious fervor and the fanaticism that has come with a misinterpretation of Christianity in this country, and you combine that with an entitlement theory, um, and part of that entitlement has to do with race, and it also has to do with class. In The Handmaid's Tale, Nick, for instance, was an eye. And an eye was a part of a class that was a bit above the soldiers who were killing people and putting them on the wall. And that made him a better person somehow.
Well, can we pause for just a second? Because there's a lot of ways we could go with this, with this. But I appreciate you bringing up Nick, because that isn't one of the points that you had suggested that one of the characters that you had suggested we talk about. But as I was thinking about the book in relationship to questions of class,
Mm-hmm.
he's actually something of an anomaly. He is the only person who has a certain amount of class mobility.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually went back and watched where he's first brought into the sons of Jacob by the person who becomes the high commander, the first high commander, Andrew
Mm-hmm.
Price, who's
Do you
killed.
remember what episode and season that was?
Yeah, it's episode one, season one, episode 8. There's a flashback.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And so he is basically, he's lost his job at a steel mill. And so is his dad, and his brother's having trouble, um, and so Price, who's a career counselor, sees that he's really vulnerable, but also there's a scuffle in the office of the career counseling place,
Mm-hmm.
and Nick is a good fighter. So he figures he's going to enlist this lost young man and brainwash him and bring him into the fold.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we learn that that absolutely happens, and that early on, Nick actually commits war crimes and so forth and so on. And so it's really curious the way and the way that Nick makes his way from being a guardian to an angel to an eye. I forget what the
Yeah.
sequence
Mm-hmm.
is. I try to keep it straight, but anyway. Um, and apologies to people who know the book. I think I know it, but there's parts. I mean,
I
I still
know.
forget. I
After
know
you
that
think it through so much, you get lost in
I've got
all the magic
anyway.
sauce.
But what he does is that he gets to become an eye by betraying the person that he had been guarding. And so he makes his way through the system by by betraying people. and by making deals. I mean, later in season 3, he makes, I think it's 3, he makes the deal with Commander Lawrence. Oh, actually, no, that's season 4. He makes a deal with Commander Lawrence, and he eventually, um, Waterford and then feeds him to the angry women.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but even he's painted in a very sympathetic light, um, because he's nice to June,
Mm-hmm. Because he
and
loves June.
because he loves
But that
June.
doesn't mean that he doesn't betray her over and over, and that he made a choice. And that choice was to become a man, have more power. More power.
Yeah, and he this is how he moved from being lower class to being
Mhm,
upper
mhm,
class.
mhm, mhm, mhm. And I
It's
think that was also true of Serena Joy, having privilege but no power. And that's one of the things that we certainly don't teach our children much in this culture about the balance of privilege and power. And and I'm going to relegate that and assign that to somebody in the audience who has loads and loads of money. I mean, obviously Eric, I mean, a good example that came up in this past week is Kim Kardashian admonishing women that if they want to be successful, they have to get off their ass and work hard. Just get off your ass and work hard. Nothing to do with her father was a famous
right.
and a millionaire, and she was able to jettison her public career with a famous rapper who she arranged a sex video for. I mean, it's almost as if people don't synthesize and then do critical examination of
Right.
what's happening around them. What the
Right.
hell? I don't know. I am certain, and I don't know Kim Kardashian, but I am certain that there are many women who work much harder than she ever did, and they are not successful for other reasons. So
Yeah.
I think it's, and here again, and I want to point out to our audience, here again is another opportunity to use this dystopian tale to examine what is in front of us. Now, can we talk about, I think Aunt Lydia is a player, and she figured out how to play the game.
Yes, actually, I was thinking, about Aunt Lydia, um, because, particularly by the time you get to season 4,
Hmm.
she's much more of a player than Serena Joy, and Serena thinks she's a player, and she tries to be, but she
Hmm.
keeps getting played. And you also you wanted to talk about Serena in relation to, the her handler Mark Tuello in
Mhm.
Canada, and
Mhm. Mhm.
that's a really sad, I think, tale of how she thought she was so clever. And anyway, but in terms of, okay, so once you get to once Gilead has formed, then the only women who are allowed to read and write are the aunts.
Mhm.
That's huge.
Yes.
That's huge.
Mhm. Hmm.
And so the only person who ends up being able uh, negotiate uh, to the end really is Aunt Lydia.
Do you think that the aunts are given that particular privilege because they are asexual in the perception of the commanders and the people in charge?
I mean, that's got to be part of it. But I mean,
I
the,
just
the
keep I just keep thinking that Aunt Lydia knew how to play. She
oh,
understood. She was so smart that she understood the game that they had developed.
well, if you in Atwood's follow-up book, The
Testament.
Testaments,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, I mean, I approached that book with some trepidation because I was I talked about it with my daughter, and we're like, how could Aunt Lydia be a vaguely sympathetic character? I mean, uh, she's yeah, she's
Well, I
she's
mean, but you
vicious,
could see glimpses
right? But
in
it's
in her rethinking of who
right,
she was with June.
right, and
She wanted to be June, but it was
be
too late.
June. She wanted to be June, the rebellious June.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well,
Yes.
I don't want to give too much away because I do want people to read the Testaments. But Atwood actually sees Aunt Lydia as having a long game. I get this is the
Yes.
long con.
Mhm.
This is
Mhm.
um but I mean, when you actually look at, your choices, I mean, you can be one of the wives, and as you say, that gives you privilege but no power. And in fact, it makes you party to rape, which I don't think, I mean, this is not a good choice. Uh, you can be a
But
Martha.
but how do people? Let's stop and talk about the commander wives, the wives. How do people begin to compromise their humanity at in participating in a rape event under the guise of ritual? How does a woman? I look at some of these, especially in the Hulu production, and try to figure out who were they before all this happened. Most of them were probably housewives who obeyed their husbands. They
They
came
were,
out of
yeah.
the Mormon church, or they came out of um, some other craziness.
Hmm.
But
Well, I
there
mean,
are some that are, for instance, the woman, the wife that had June's daughter.
right, right.
She was smart enough to, rather than punish June, she was smart enough to move away. Let's solve this by moving away. She was smart enough to be able to critically understand June's position, her anger, her frustration, and you see that in her. Then you had Commander whatever his name is, the last commander that June was under,
Lawrence.
Lawrence, Commander
And
Lawrence,
yeah, and his wife
and
Eleanor.
his wife, who had become so fragile under this system. And I'm wondering, what on Tuesdays, I get very generous and I say, Susan Collins could be Commander, what did you say his name?
Lawrence.
Lawrence's wife. Maybe that's what's wrong with her. She has simply collapsed under all of the weight of what has happened while she's been in office. Um, and that's on Tuesdays when I'm generous. Um, so um, if we go back to the commanders' wives, they clearly understood their roles. They clearly clinged to the privilege. And most of them weren't concerned about the power, as long as their husbands had the power. And when June pulled off her little drama, not June, when Serena Joy decided to read in front of the council, you could see and you could understand the kind of fear that all the women who were standing behind, because when she started reading, they started getting the hell on out of there. Saying, nah, sister, I don't think this is working. I gotta go. Which was hilarious to me. They said, oh, no, 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 no. You're not messing with my stuff. And right now, you're about messing with my stuff, and I'm out of here. So,
Well, I mean, maybe this is too simplistic, but I feel like I've seen that the strategy of the wives. I feel like I see that day in and day out with trophy wives.
mhm, mhm.
Um, I mean, these,
Melania Trump,
well,
uh,
yeah,
who is
she's.
clearly smarter than her husband. Um, yeah.
I mean, this is they understand the game. The game
Mhm,
is that if you're beautiful and if you keep your trap shut, you are going to have a luxurious life. If that's what you want, and you have your 2.5 children and so forth. I mean, I have seen so many women do that. I, I would, I would slip my wrist and be an alcoholic and be a mess, right? Because also I wouldn't be invited because I don't, anyway, but you see, but I mean, um, I feel like it's a really clear commentary on the way uh, women in the U.S. have so many women have sold out for so long.
you know, Hulu has never done a polling of the class, occupation, age of people who watch this show. And I'd be very, very interested in seeing a demographic and economic breakdown. Because one of the things that we do know, and I was very particularly taught by domestic violence specialists and experts, that the silence of women in marriages that are oppressive is one of the features that allow some women to be um, chronic victims in battering. Did I say too much to be saying those? But anyway, um, so you're right, and many of them have been groomed to be trophy wives. I know when I was in high school and I went to Palm Beach High School.
Palm Beach, Florida.
Yes, I am a graduate of Palm Beach High School. And all the girls were constantly concerned, not all of them, but most of them, one me, constantly concerned about the status of the family of the boys who were interested in them. None of the boys were interested in me, so you know, um, only my
Oh, you're muted.
hit something.
Yeah, there you're back.
Okay, so um,
But there's,
so
I
there's
guess,
a grooming that goes on.
and then, I mean, I mean, in their view, it puts them still above this whole list of other women. You've got the aunts, you've got the Marthas, the handmaids, the Jezebels, and then something that does come out really clearly in the book, but not so much
Hulu
in the
production.
series,
Hmm.
are the Econo wives. Now, that is my favorite term of all time. I want to come back to it, but there's also in the series you've got the sort of rural people, which is where Eden comes from, who
Hmm.
gets married off to
Hmm.
Nick.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and then there's the women the unwomen who are in the colonies, and then there are the old and disabled women who are just eliminated, right? So
Hmm.
they don't even you don't see them because they're like killed immediately. They don't even get to be unwomen. So, but what's so cool in the book is that all of the everybody's got their costumes. All the women do, including the Econo wives. Um, and so if the handmaids are in this red and the wives are in blue and the Marthas are dull red, the Econo wives wear red, blue, and green striped dresses that are made of cheap material.
Right.
and and I just there's something about particularly in Atwood's book that really just clarifies that in the US class exists, it has always existed, and there's just she just like
Hmm.
puts it in really stark terms.
Yeah,
um
I mean, even commerce is built around classes. Like when everyone started, all women started shopping furiously at Lord and Taylor, then they had to create Nordstrom's. When everyone and I mean it's like that. The um in the food industry, look at pizza. Um, if you buy from Domino's as opposed to the Pizza Hut, as opposed to Papa John's, as opposed to the other place, uh, it all has to do, and you look at the locations where those places are. Like the other place that I can't think of is always in um, poor and ethnically diverse communities. Um,
I would
the
help you out if I could think of it, but
yeah,
I, I quit eating
it's
pizza
Caesar,
because I like
Caesar's
okay.
pizza, Caesar's. That should have been easy because it has an icon that's supposed to be whatever. But Then you look at Pizza Hut, which is always on the border of diverse communities and predominantly working class white communities. It's a very interesting thing to begin to look at, and I especially like the idea, like in Chestnut, Massachusetts, there are two malls. Well, Chestnut is like what, 9, 10 blocks or something, and they have two malls. Well, one is for the very rich, and one is for the filthy rich.
Yep.
And
Yep.
the 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 tenants in those malls reflect that. So, um,
I I guess I just, yeah, I mean, I think that I wish that we would, um I think what's so great about your series is that rather than look at The Handmaid's Tale as science fiction, you use it as a lens to look at what's happening in the US, to kind of make,
we call it the looking glass. It's our
yeah,
looking glass.
to
Yeah,
really
yeah,
recognize that what it does is it just, puts
yeah.
everything in sort of vivid color.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and one of the reasons I think that June rose up as a leader is because her commander had a certain status.
hmm.
Because Fred was a leader. So the other handmaids thought, it's almost like when you were in elementary school, if your mother was the principal, then somehow they thought you were smarter than everybody else. You know? So um, it seems to have worked that way. And that brings me, because I want to use our final half hour to do this, to talk about class and how we tend to dismiss class as an element in our lives in America. And if you see the Econo wives and you see the Jezebels and you see the Marthas, in that game, they all had a role, but every role was to service the ideology of authoritarianism and theocracy. And so let's talk about class. And I'm going to throw something out, because you and I both agree that we need to talk about the way in which Fred Hampton, the former head chair of the Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party,
Mm.
came to us in these Americas, both as a resistor, a philosopher, an activist, and a warrior. Um, Martin Luther King's movement, under the auspices of a number of religious leaders, was pretty much an acceptable conduit for change for blacks in the beginning, and the Negroes, and then it widened itself because of his particular penchant to draw people in to what he was saying. So it was a safe and very middle class civil rights part of the civil rights movement. It was safe. It was where, and part of it had to do with who was associated with that part of the movement. When SNCC was formed, And most people think SNCC was formed by Stokely Carmichael. SNCC was not formed by Stokely Carmichael. SNCC was formed by John Lewis and others who had decided they wanted to take a harder line on racism in America. So, um, and 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 because I am of that generation, I can say that Stokely came along a couple of years later, along with people like Ruby Sales and Ella Baker, to give it meat. It was a very palatable, hearty vegetable and oatmeal part of the movement in the beginning. I can just say that, you know. I ran away from home to join SNCC. Only 2 days, but anyway. Uh, so um, then there was, and this is, and I'm saying all of this for you who are wondering where is she going with this, to talk about how class affects everything. So when it was time, and Stokely had given us the words Black Power, and working class and poor people couldn't find a real way because SNCC was just filled with students, lots of students. And there was a perception that it was a college university based movement. There came the Black Panther Party that Robert Williams and his Negroes with Guns movement really initiated the thought that Black people really needed to
Protect
defend
themselves.
themselves. Um, and we haven't thought about it since 1972 until year before last, when there was a resurgence of so many white supremacy organizations in this country. So um, let's talk about what that meant in terms of how class works in this community. And, I don't want to imply at all to any white people out there that I think that class is all about white people, because you'll be emailing me and all kinds of stuff. Don't stop. Class is everywhere. I mean, I call the bourgeoisie, black bourgeoisie, political bourgeoisie, all the people who are black who managed to get people to vote for them because they had money, because it's a system we work in. So let's talk about the notion of Fred Hampton and his resistance. And he was very unique, by the way. He was very unique in Black Panther party chapters across the country. Even I was in the Boston chapter, and that chapter was very unique in that it was more intellectual. I mean, I did two things while I was in the Panther Party for like 4 or 5 years. Um, the breakfast program, I did what I call the Liberation Academy, which we help children in high school with homework and filling out college applications. And I ran the topographical center because somebody said the Boston police had built tunnels under the streets in Roxbury, and we were trying to figure out where those tunnels were. Because I was young, I was a college student. So let's talk about how Fred Hampton and why he stood out for so long. His presence was beyond the party after the party had disintegrated. That's what I always say about him. I met him in New York City with Ta-Nehisi Coates' father, Paul. Paul was interviewing him. I was, along with some others that they were trying to figure out how to do topographical research, what we were doing in Boston. They were also trying to figure out in Chicago how to increase the resources of the breakfast program. But here was a man who had, out of his own experience, created a resistance philosophy that we had not seen in years. We had not seen a clarity in terms of connecting the dots between Black liberation, um, Black liberation efforts, discussion, planning, and working people. So let's talk about Fred Hampton.
Well, it's just, I mean, it only took um, just a couple of years for him to become the most wanted, seen as the most dangerous figure by the FBI. Why? Because he was going to do the impossible. He was going to undo 300 years of carefully crafted racist uh, uh, w- social organizing, political organizing by elites. He was going to he was getting he in just a few years, literally, he was going to undo all that. In 3 years, he was going to undo what took 300 years for white
Yes.
elites to put in motion.
And many people do not understand that it was Abby Hoffman that put the target. He didn't mean to. That put the target on Fred Hampton's back.
Say
In
more about that.
okay, in that trial,
Mm,
after the Chicago Three or whatever they call themselves, during that trial, Abby Hoffman made 4 or 5 speeches about the power of Fred Hampton.
mm.
And it was the judge in that case and the Chicago police, along with the FBI, who then colluded and concluded that Fred Hampton was too smart
To
and
live.
had too much power. Because if you will recall, um, he was being cited as the source of the organizing. And so I always I always said that was it was the judge in that case who initiated the assassination of Fred Hampton.
That certainly could be, because that judge is, is amazing. Um,
But
I
then
get,
when you see what happened to Fred Hampton and his assassination, and you understand that the assassination of Martin Luther King and the assassination of Malcolm X, um, that this threat this blowback on people who resist. And ever since back in 1985, 86, when I read the Atwood book, in my head, sitting on the train, sitting on the bus, at the bus stop, in the car, waiting for the red light, I have always tried to figure out strategically what would have been the right resistance.
Well, I think that one of the things that's come up is that the Black Lives Matter model, where you don't have powerful, a single charismatic figure, and instead you have this uh, rhizomatic, multifaceted, um, ongoing, sort of loose knit uh, movement of people working towards something other than the destruction of the country, which you guys talked about last week, which I
Yeah.
actually think is what will happen if we do not
Hmm.
reverse, if
And
we.
and many people say that um, for the reasons that you've just cited, that Black Lives Matter was successful, and the rule of success for Black Lives Matter, the single rule of success for Black Lives Matter as an organization, was fundraising. And one of the reasons that the leaders have essentially scattered to the wind, and one is under suspicion of mishandling the funds, is another form of blowback.
Right, right. um but I guess just to go back to the significance of what Fred Hampton was up to. So, I mean, one of the things in a, just like a very short time, um, he was able to form a coalition that included the Young Patriots, which were,
Hmm.
people white from Appalachia, the Young Lords that were the really angry Hispanic,
Latin, yeah, Latin and Hispanic, yeah.
and got the Chicago street gangs to chill out, because he was able to persuade them that if you're fighting against each other, you're aiming your bullets in the wrong direction.
Hmm.
Um,
And Fred would had this kind of like touch where uh, you kind of could hear between the lines. I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but brothers and sisters, if you do it this way, you got to know what's going to happen, what's at the end of that. If you do it this way, I mean, he was, and he wasn't he didn't have, I mean, I knew a lot of brothers and sisters that had very angry continents, and I really liked him from the beginning, that when at the time that I met him, because you could feel such a soft spirit. And maybe soft is not the word to use, uh, a welcoming, um, loving spirit.
and so what he was pointing out, which is somewhat similar to the Holocaust survivor, the woman who gave me really important information as a young person,
Hmm.
who said, it's not a fight, it's not a dog fight, it's there's enough. There's
Hmm.
enough. Keep giving. There's enough. You will always, you know, I mean, it sounds so Pollyanna. You will always have enough. I mean, that is, it's a lot more than that. But there's a whole mindset that needs to be focused, both head and heart, on what, um, and really what the prize is. And the prize is to have peace and calm and reason win out. This is not somebody gets ahead of somebody else.
Hmm. Which, which really takes us back to the Handmaid's Tale. That if you don't find that place, if you're not led to that place, because I think it's in the Hulu um, production, I think when Fred is stoned or whatever they were doing,
At the end, at the very
yeah,
end.
at the
Uh-huh.
very end, and they had had a number of discussions, if you will recall, group therapy or whatever they were doing. And these were people who understood what enough was and understood also that everything had been taken and they had nothing, and had been so traumatized by it that that was all that was left.
They had been what was to act out in brutality. There was no rest for them.
Mm-hmm.
They had been scarred for life.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that is, I mean, I just, I think I think that I think the first week, I forget the person's name who you had on, and he was talking about,
Jared Yates Sexton.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
he was talking about growing up in a white supremacist family. And, I think then I talked about growing up in a white supremacist family. And he said, at some point you either continue it or
Mm-hmm.
you or you or you walk away from it. You can't, you're either gonna keep scarring people
Mm-hmm.
like you've been, or you're, so I think that I think really one of the things that, the way June ends up is, it really, I think it, for me, I wander off into other topics. And to me, it's the larger topic of being imprisoned, and that you anyone who's been through trauma is just not the same. It's just not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even if, and so that's a huge act for people to get beyond trauma. But the elites that have done it from the beginning of this country, I've taught I told you I want to talk about Bacon's Rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, part of what interests me is that, there are fantasies about the way this country started, and that, going, and so many different ones. But, 300 years before Fred Hampton was thriving and then assassinated, um, there was this rebellion. And it was a moment where um, you had white indentured servants
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and landless whites joining forces with enslaved, indentured, and free Black people. And they fought for a year against the colonial governor, who was backed by British forces. And what they wanted was some sort of piece of the pie. And the of course they were, you know, they didn't win. Guess
Mm-hmm.
what? Big surprise, right? Um, but the interesting part is what comes next. I mean, first of all, the fact that they at that time, those folks saw that they had that race was not a reason. Nothing, race did not divide them. That was step one. Step two, they were joined by their social circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, important point. So the long and short of it is that this uprising that joined the lower class, people from different backgrounds, this so terrified the Virginia elite that they spent the next 25 years working out in great detail what ended up being called the Virginia Slave Codes, which were finally all assembled by 1705. So it took them about 25 years. And what this did is that it finally socially separated lower class whites and blacks. And it made, how can I put it? It is seen as creating the institution, the social institution of slavery, and the real beginning of that type of racism, the white supremacist versus enslaved black mentality. All of this takes place. So back up one more step. All of this takes place against a backdrop where there was a huge amount of animosity again, on the part of the colonial settlers of both lower and upper classes against the people who actually lived on the land. And so there was a real thirst on some people's part to initiate genocide as quickly and completely as possible. So one of the most interesting comments that I've seen about this is the point that for the Virginia elites, there was an obvious lesson in the rebellion, and that was that the resentment of an alien race, so in this case it was the indigenous peoples, that it could be more powerful than the resentment of an upper class. Should I say that again? Because
Yes, please. And
really,
also the date, 1676.
Yes. So here's the great line. So this joining of lower class whites and blacks together had was so terrifying for the elites that they then moved to separate them so there would never be this kind of class rebellion anymore. So they bought off the lower class whites and further enslaved and made it impossible for any black person to have full personhood. And so and all of this, this whole rebellion taking place against the backdrop of both upper and lower class whites wanting to wipe out the indigenous people whose land they were taking. So the statement is that for the elites at this time, the rebellion had an obvious lesson. that the resentment of an alien race, that resentment on the part of both lower class whites and blacks against the indigenous people, that could be even more powerful than their resentment of an upper class. And this is a terrible, a terrible weakness in human beings that the elites, white elites in the US, have played and amplified from the 1600s forward.
Yeah. But where do we see that? Let's take a look.
So I guess what I find so powerful is, for example, Fred Hampton is able to undo 300 years, not single-handed. You know what I'm saying? It's not, but it's just remarkable that in just a few years, he's working to undo all of that. And that, I mean,
not to undo it, to undermine it.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I would characterize
To
what
undermine
he
the
was doing.
propaganda, to undermine the propaganda that white
Exactly.
elites kept promoted from 1600s forward, that whites and blacks are separate, that you should hate all aliens, and that you should just, upper class people know best.
Yeah, yeah.
That
But
package is so toxic.
let's take that 25 years later to the election of Barack Obama as President of the United States of America. And if nothing more, he fit the definition of an alien. Not only, excuse me, not only an alien in the sense that he wasn't black and he wasn't white, but an alien in the sense that he was a African American man that had something that was what white men should only have, and he was undermining the rebellion of 16 the Bacon rebellion.
Well, he was undermining what he was undermining was the Virginia slave codes. That
Yes,
is what.
yes. And it also translates itself into the issue of class. If you look at Barack Obama, Michelle Obama's resume coming into the White House, he was an alien who had the support of white people. He was an alien because he had the American dream down pat. 2 children and a dog. No, maybe they didn't have the dog when they first moved to the White House, but he was and she was Ivy League and had no criminal record. I mean, imagine for a moment how that might have blown. So it did. It blew so many people's minds in this country.
I totally agree. And I think that, I've been thinking, the last, thinking about talking about questions of class, and the you've got Obama elected, and then there's the incredible blowback, and more people bought
Mhm.
guns during Obama's
Mhm.
years in office and so forth. And part of me is I think that Obama gets blamed, not blamed, but blamed for the
Assigned.
assigned is the cause for the rise, this virulent, visible rise of white supremacy, and I do think that that's part of it. I think it's also that American popular culture is a place where African Americans have been absolutely essential. And I'm not talking about just the contribution of jazz and blues and all of this other stuff, but I'm talking about what teenagers of any color, shape, and size are listening to in terms of music, right? From let's just talk about
Mhm.
the rise, the
Music and art.
right, exactly.
Mhm,
So if you look
mhm,
at the world of entertainment, you have you've got every teenager from mid to late 80s forward listening to some iteration of hip hop,
mhm, mhm,
right? And you've got in terms of professional sports, who are the major stars?
mhm,
I mean, I think that one of the things that has this 30% of the U.S. Um, the white evangelicals who are of various economic brackets, who are the devoted GOP voters and the white supremacists to the grave. I think that what really kills them is that in the public sphere you have incredibly charismatic African Americans that are making them look bad.
mhm, mhm. Well, sometimes you can even characterize it as many people would say that whiteness only has, excuse me, that whiteness only has um, a low level hum.
Okay.
Okay. You had Sally Jesse Raphael, and it was about her glasses. But you had Oprah Winfrey, which was about her illumination and her rise. Nobody thought about how Sally Jesse Raphael got to be on national TV. It was assumed that she belonged there. So I think in popular culture, as you've been pointing out, that one of the things that has made many hip hop artists and many um, movie film filmographers and movie stars and actors and actresses is how they got there. I mean, I watched I don't know who did it. Kama, I can't think of his last name right now. He's been on um, my radio show many times, but he did this thing on Bill Cosby. And one of the reasons that Bill Cosby was so successful as an entertainer, as a movie star, however you want to, as a comedian, because he wasn't supposed to be there. He was the alien that you've just so wonderfully um, outlined how all of this began. It's the alien part. I mean, imagine for a moment the first time that I paid any attention to hip hop. It was because my daughter was running for president of her ninth grade class, and she wanted to use this hip hop thing song that I had never heard of, and I worked at a radio station, and I had to listen to it to make sure that it was appropriate for a school setting. Um, but when you think about, look at Biggie and Tupac, look at Kaepernick, look at, I mean, the whole the whole thing about Aaron Hernandez, who became a murderer, and and because he wasn't supposed to be a smart kid who graduated from high school and early because he was so smart and went to University of Florida, blah 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 blah, because he wasn't supposed to be there. I love you for telling us, giving us the language, and that's what Margaret Atwood has done. She has given us the language. She has given us permission. And all of you who just watched the Hulu production out there, you have permission to use the word fascism, oppression, suppression, torture, genocide. Because don't forget that last week we decided all the black people were victims of genocide, and that's why the Handmaid's Tale is so white.
Oh,
And then when you find, I mean, like the Martha that lived in the June's household, I can never remember these people's names. It's just like I
Rita.
Rita.
Is it Rita? I think.
Rita was so supplicant because she knew too much. You could tell that Rita had lived in the United States of America black, and she knew how to adjust the thing to survive. Part of June's problem early on is she didn't know how to adjust the thing to survive.
Right, because she still thought that she was privileged. She knew
Yes,
she was powerless, but she
yes,
still thought she was privileged.
yeah. And okay, before we have to close this up, I have been dying all week waiting to talk to you about this. Serena Joy
Serena.
and a Canadian official. She really thought she was going to somehow manage him, handle him, and he really didn't have an idea of too much about the extent to which she was seeped into her own sauce.
Say more what you mean by that.
She was going to be the commander's wife. If she couldn't do it by herself, she was willing to enjoin herself again with dreaded Fred, because she went into the exile arrest under law enforcement in Canada with a great deal of resentment for Fred. He couldn't give her a baby. She had to give up her sex life, pretty much. And she understood how attracted he was to June. He was intrigued by June because Serena Joy had never been June or June like. Even even with her craziness with her book and her protests, she wasn't as smart. She was just trying to be successful, whatever it took. And he understood that. And, that's how I read it. So, anyways, so Serena Joy is, this guy, he didn't understand that this is a woman who has transposed herself in a system of white female superiority, and he doesn't get it. And I think he I don't know, what do you think? I think it was complicated.
Yeah, I think it's complicated. I think that my sense is that uh, he well, I think that Serena found. Look, I think his the character's name is Mark.
Hmm.
So I think she found. I think that Mark was the perfect uh, person for that job. He's very good looking in her sort of
Hmm.
concept of good looking.
Hmm.
Very smooth.
Hmm.
Knows how to treat a lady. Was always very deferential to her. Um, and was always kind of mm, equally intimate with her.
Hmm.
Very
Hmm.
good. Eh?
Hmm.
And I think Serena lapped it up. I think that she thought she could play him. And in the end, he betrayed her,
I
right?
don't think I'm not sure. And this is what I meant when we put this title together, The Players in the Game. Mark was in another
He was in
kind
another,
of game.
you're right. He was in another game. I don't think betray her is not, you're right. He didn't betray her. He outplayed her, I
He
think.
outplayed her. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. He
And
he had his, what did they call it, instead of his male wiles.
right, right.
And she
Yeah,
bought right into it,
she
not
did.
understanding
She,
that she was being baited.
she thought that Mark was as dumb as Fred.
Yes. Hey, Dr. Baron, you just absolutely,
Um,
because she had written the book, she had written the rules of Gilead. She really wrote her book was the rules of Gilead, and she thought she was the smartest in the room.
which I think is partly why I mean, and she's not dumb, you
No,
know?
no.
I think that partly the what keeps anyone interested just sort of in the melodrama in the series is the I don't want to say tit for tat, but the strategizing, for example, between Serena Joy and June, and they're both trying to get something, and they make these deals, and then one breaks the deal, and I think the same thing happens with Commander Lawrence and June, and they're playing,
The
they're
cat and
negotiating,
mouse between those 2. Mhm.
they're always negotiating, and it's so icky.
Everything is transactional.
Exactly, that was the word that I keep
Mhm,
thinking of. It is
mhm.
not, it's all about getting something for something else, because we're back to the same friggin' thing. There's not enough, and you have to be a player, and you have to be,
Yeah.
marking out, you
And
have to
who was
be.
not transactional in this entire dystopian tale? Janine.
Oh, Janine.
Blind me in one eye, take away my babies, break my ankles, do all of these things to me, it's still not about a transaction.
That's a good point.
Yeah, yeah. You know, here's the thing that I want to ask you about, and it really has to do with from your scholarship. To what extent does this work as learning media? The book, the, the series on Hulu.
Well, I think, the person who got me started thinking a lot about, well, there are two people. One, my daughter, years ago,
Mhm.
and who is my best teacher, and and then also Karen Ritzenhoff.
Mhm.
And I think you may have asked her the same question.
Mhm.
And I would have to say just what she said, which is that it allows people to talk about things that maybe they wouldn't necessarily talk about.
Mhm. Mhm. I ask that question and I keep delving into it simply because I hear from so many people that, oh, I can't bear to watch, I can't bear to read. It's so horrid. And um you know and I'm trying to grapple with that, because if you read the New York Times, if you read Business Insider, if you tiptoe through the tulips through the Atlantic and the New Yorker, that one of the things that you don't have is you don't have tripwires when the propaganda rises up. You don't have any of the things to say to be the alert to go off. And this tale is an opportunity for the alert to go off. Like I'm living in Florida. I retired from having retired from my professional work that paid the bills, and decided to move to Florida so I could garden all year long. But they didn't tell me it's so hot down here that you can't garden all year long. The heat and the sun's like the snow. You cannot garden. But anyway, um, so
No,
I live in the state of Florida. It never occurred to me to think through the politics of this state. Well, keep in mind that Ron DeSantis was not governor when I moved here. Um, um, Bush's son was the governor, and it wasn't as um, threatening as it is now. It wasn't as fascist. I mean, fascism has an authoritarianism and autocratic behavior has seeped into Florida politics to the point where you cannot assume that it's going to go away.
well, part of the main problem is you got all those old white people there. That's your problem. That's your problem. All those friggin' people in those retirement communities.
Yeah, yeah,
Holy shit!
yeah.
They're
So,
all.
I just think it's so important. I've been trying to organize season one um, viewing with my neighbors of The Handmaid's Tale. And it's how do you get people, um, you know, But anyway, we're going to talk about that again, Cynthia Ann Baron, before you um, before you before this series is over. But I want to talk to you specifically about you've just gone into a new role at Bowling Green University, and you are the co-chair of the Caucus on Class of the Society. No, you you are co-chair of the Caucus on Class of the Society for Cinema and Media.
Yeah, well, it's just,
Congratulations.
well, it's, you know what? That I didn't, I was the only volunteer. So it's not like there was a big pool of people
Mhm.
wanted to do this. It's just that the organization of film and media scholars have different subgroups. So, there's the Black Caucus and the
Yeah.
Middle East Caucus and the
Okay.
Latino
Mhm.
Caucus,
Mhm.
and so there's the caucus on class, and so I think one of the things that is interesting is that in the academy, in the particularly in the area of film and media studies, there has been a fair amount of attention to questions of representation concerning gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, and so forth in the last 30 years.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
whereas questions of class have been kind of not considered so much.
Mhm.
And I think part of that had to do with the fact that people who were in the academy had been bought off themselves,
Mhm.
just like we've been talking all night.
Mhm.
Well, you may not make very much money, but they call you doctor. You're not a real doctor. God forbid if you're ever supposed to save somebody's life. Um, but, you can pretend you belong to some sort of elite group.
Mhm.
Well, that has come back and uh, to bite everybody's ass. And now, being a university college teacher is one of the most precarious uh, labor positions that's possible,
Mhm.
because the universities generally have something in the neighborhood of 70% of their labor force is all either adjuncts or graduate students.
Mhm.
And the only people left who are tenured are old people, and they're just waiting. The universities are just waiting for those people to die off, and then it'll all be precarious labor.
Mhm. But what does that tell us? What does that tell us? That
Tells us
tells.
that exactly what happened in The Handmaid's Tale
Thank you.
happened in the academy.
Yes. Yes. Control. And education is a point of control. Food and the chain supply, all the same. Control. And now, as we go through the third week of an invasion of Ukraine and talk about gas prices and banning imports from Russia of oil products, we're also talking about control. See, it's always great to talk to you. we could we could have this conversation every day and it would all be brand new. Dr. Cynthia Ann Baron, thank you so much for joining us, for illuminating and highlighting and making brilliant the work of Margaret Atwood by connecting the dots to what we face in this country. You really help us see ourselves in June in Serena Joy. I mean, that's what a looking glass is for, to see what you see. So I hope that you'll come back. And I definitely want to have more discussion with you about um, the aliens in Virginia, because I think it's an important lesson. So we've got a lot to talk about, and we thank you for this discussion and this wonderful discourse tonight, and your offerings of your analysis and your perspectives. Thank you so very much.
Well, thanks. Thanks.
Now,
Thank you.
how can people contact you? Because I can ban you on Twitter. No.
No, I have too many people I got too many people getting in touch with me, but it's always good. I'm easy to find if you Google me. I'm the Cynthia Baron in Bowling Green, Ohio, in out in the middle of the GMO cornfields and soybean fields.
Well, we certainly wish you well, and we certainly enjoy our association with us. And with that, I'll say to you, may the eye be
Oh,
blind. Blessed be the fruit, our sister Cynthia Ann Baron. Thank you so much. And for those who are with us, thank you for being with us. Next week, we are going to be, not next week, on March 4th, we are going to be joined by Carmen del Rosario, who is an international anti violence activist, and Professor Dr. Jean R. Bajalan, who's going to be with us, and we're going to be talking about, the theme will be America Under Siege, the Footprints of Fascism, with Carmen del Rosario and Dr. Jean R. Bajalan. That's on March 24th. We're going to be taking the week off next week, and we're going to be coming back on March 24th. Thank you so very much for joining us tonight, and we certainly thank Dr. Cynthia Ann Baron for her contribution to what we believe is an important conversation. And Margaret Atwood, in her dystopian tale, has provided us an inspiring and excellent opportunity to see ourselves. I'm Janice Graham, and I look forward to seeing you on March 24th. You can find us at ifamericafails.live and on Twitter at TruthWorks Network, TWN Talk, TWN Talk. And with that, have a good week. We'll see you on the 24th. And may the eye be blind.
Seriously? What the actual
f-